Big Shaq's daughter thought it was just a routine stop, until the racist cop demanded more than her papers. With a black belt under her belt and her father's name echoing through the city, the game was about to change. A silent recording captured every word, every threat, and what started as intimidation turned into a viral reckoning. The silence broke, and power shifted. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun sat high above the horizon, casting a clean midday glow over the quiet rows of upscale homes in Amber Ridge, a pristine suburban neighborhood where sidewalks shimmered from recent pressure washes and mailboxes bore the insignias of polished family names. The kind of place where reputation was currency and presence was power. Mara O'Neill knew this world well, not because she craved its acceptance, but because she had been raised to master it on her terms. She drove with a calm precision, hands at 10 and 2, eyes steady, her black Tesla reflecting the sun as it hummed down Maple Hollow Drive. She was dressed sharply navy blazer, white collar, subtle pearl studs, and a wristwatch that did more than tell time. She had left her office early for lunch with her father, Big Shaq to the world, but just dad to her, and was rerouting after traffic slowed near the business district. When the flashing red and blue lit up behind her, she didn't panic. This was routine. Or at least it should have been. The police SUV swerved out of its hiding pocket and nestled behind her at an awkward angle, closer than protocol suggested. Mara O'Neill eased to the curb, shoulders straight. She rolled the window down before the officer reached her, posture confident but composed. Officer Chet Landry approached slowly, sunglasses mirrored, chin lifted as if addressing a subordinate. "License and registration," he said, voice clipped, not bothering with a greeting. Mara O'Neill handed over the documents without comment. Her tone when she spoke was smooth as glass. "May I ask the reason for the stop, officer?" Landry didn't answer immediately. He glanced inside the car, his gaze lingering too long on her dashboard, then on her skin. "Taillights busted," he said finally. Mara O'Neill blinked. "With all due respect, that's not accurate. I had it inspected yesterday." Landry smirked. "I say it's out. It's out. Got a problem with that?" She paused. There it was, that subtle press, the invisible weight of someone drunk on small power. Not overt, not loud, just heavy enough to make a point. "No problem, officer," she said calmly. "Would you like me to show the inspection papers?" Landry leaned closer. "You know what, maybe I won't write it up. Might just forget the whole thing, unless I have to dig deeper." "You sure there's nothing else I should know? No other issues that might need clearing up?" Mara O'Neill understood the implication instantly. This wasn't about a taillight. This was about leverage, and he'd picked her car because he hadn't yet recognized her. To him, she wasn't the daughter of a beloved public figure. She was a black woman, alone in a wealthy neighborhood, driving a car he decided she didn't belong in. That's all he needed. "I assure you everything is in order," she replied. Her hand, hidden below the window line, tapped twice on the face of her watch. The voice recording function engaged, silently. Landry exhaled a short laugh, then circled the car, giving it a theatrical inspection. "You live around here?" "I'm on my way to meet family," she replied, still poised. "Not far." "Uh-huh," he muttered. "Look, I could run this through the system, or maybe you help me out here, and I take 5 minutes, and move on. Lot of paperwork otherwise." Mara O'Neill's fingers curled slightly over the steering wheel. The proposition was clear, a shakedown, wrapped in insinuation. He wanted a payoff or a reason to escalate. "No," she said evenly. "Let's go through the system." Landry's smile faltered. Meanwhile, across town, Shaquille O'Neal sat in the corner booth of their favorite cafe, a quiet spot he'd helped open years ago. The server brought him his usual iced coffee and avocado toast, but his mind wasn't on the food. Mara O'Neill was rarely late. And when she was, she texted, "Today, nothing." He tapped her name into his phone and called. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Shaq leaned back slowly, setting the phone down with a quiet thud. A heaviness settled over him. He didn't need alerts or alarms to feel when something was wrong. It was a father's instinct, a shift in the air, a quiet tension in his chest that had never failed him. He opened his secure contacts and dialed Terry Lasco, a former private investigator turned community advocate, who still had access to local police channels. Terry, Shaq said. I need a trace. Just tell me if there's been any traffic stops between Winston Bluff and Amber Ridge in the last 20 minutes. Back on the street, Landry returned to Mira O'Neill's window, tapping the side of her door with his knuckles. Last chance, he said, voice sharper now. We can make this simple. Or not. I'm recording this interaction, she said. You should know that. Landry froze. His sunglasses didn't hide the twitch of surprise, but it passed quickly. What are you trying to do, make a scene? Mira O'Neill met his gaze, unwavering. No scene. Just transparency. For a moment it was quiet. A hawk circled lazily overhead, casting a shadow that drifted across the hood of her car. The heat was rising, not from the sun, but from the tension that now wrapped the vehicle like cellophane. Landry took a slow step back. Stay right here, he said, then walked back to his SUV. Inside, Mira O'Neill kept her expression unreadable. Her heart wasn't racing, but it beat with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. This wasn't about fear, it was about principle. She didn't know if Landry would escalate, call backup or manufacture a charge, but she wasn't about to fold under pressure. She'd trained too long, too hard, not just in dojos but in boardrooms, in classrooms and in moments like this where silence became strength. Back at the cafe, Shaq received the return call. Terry's voice was grim. Shaq. There's a stop logged by a Chet Landry. Highway patrol. Pulled over a black female. No priors. No warrants. Claims taillights out. Shaq's voice dropped. Where? Amber Ridge. Near Hollow Drive. Shaq was already moving before the words finished. His keys clinked against the marble tabletop. Phone pressed to his ear. You want backup? Terry asked. Not yet, Shaq replied, already sliding into his car. But keep your line open. As he pulled onto the main road, tires hissing across the summer asphalt, Shaq kept his mind locked on one thought. Mira O'Neill had always been strong, but no amount of strength should be required just to be seen as human. And today someone was about to be reminded, very clearly, that not every daughter was defenseless. The illusion of perfection draped itself over the neighborhood, like a velvet curtain suppressing the faint, steady undercurrent of biases too old to be named, but too potent to be ignored. Shaq's world wasn't far from this stage, though his roots were deeper and far more textured than the polished veneer of this suburban enclave. At home, Shaq's estate wasn't ostentatious. It was sprawling, yes, but it radiated warmth over grandeur. The family room bore traces of everyday life, framed photos of his daughters. Nomura with her ever-evolving smile, now a sharp-jawed young woman with keen eyes, and Lucille's embroidered throw blankets tossed over the couch. Shawnee Henderson, Shaq's wife, carried herself with a strategist's grace, her mind sharp as a scalpel. She could navigate public relations crises with a surgeon's precision, and still managed to remind Shaq to pick up milk on the way home. She was his grounding force and his partner in more than just marriage. Together they weren't merely a family, they were a quiet powerhouse woven through the community's fabric. Mira O'Neill, though outwardly reserved, held layers beneath her quiet demeanor that even her father hadn't fully seen. In public she was poised, a young professional balancing corporate obligations with a quiet confidence that belied her years. Privately, though, she was something else entirely. She'd trained for years in martial arts, under a discreet but renowned instructor. The discipline had shaped her not only physically but mentally, gifting her a resilience and control that she wielded like a hidden blade. It wasn't arrogance, it was preparation. A readiness she never spoke of, not even to Shaq, though Lucille had always suspected her granddaughter's strength ran deeper than appearances suggested. Lucille O'Neill was the quiet pulse of the family, her voice rich with wisdom drawn from years of lived experience. She had grown up in a world that had thrown more barriers than bridges her way. She understood the double takes, the subtle questions, the invisible rules of spaces that weren't built for them. She had taught Shaq not to lower his voice, but to deepen it, to speak with a calm gravity that could cut through arrogance and demand respect. Never give them a reason to doubt you, she had once told him, but never let them believe silence means consent. Her presence, though often backgrounded by the busyness of Shaq's schedule, was the linchpin of their home. Yet outside their walls, the neighborhood pulsed with an unspoken code. It was the sort of place where residents waved from manicured lawns, but kept mental notes of whose car lingered too long at a stop sign, whose kids played in which yards, and whose names weren't familiar enough. It was a stage where pretense played out, and behind the facade, people like Officer Chet Landry thrived. Landry's reputation wasn't splashed across headlines. It wasn't loud enough to spark official complaints, but within the force and among the residents who mattered most, he was no whispers. Threaded through the ranks, stories of stops where wallets quietly changed hands, warnings issued with smirks that twisted the law into a tool of intimidation. He played his part with a finesse that kept his record polished while leaving a trail of unsettled silences behind him. The system didn't just protect him, it enabled him. His superiors, bound by unspoken alliances and a warped sense of loyalty, overlooked discrepancies, shredded complaints before they could tarnish the department's image, and left victims voiceless. Landry's methods weren't impulsive. He targeted vulnerability, calculated his moments when his authority would seem unquestionable. Cameron O'Neill's stop was no accident. He'd spotted her, marked her an unfamiliar black woman in a high-end vehicle, moving through a neighborhood where his gaze patrolled not just for criminality, but for the perceived audacity of belonging. His smirk when she had calmly declined his proposition wasn't the beginning of his frustration. It was the beginning of his unraveling. Back in Shaq's world, as his car cut through the city's arteries toward Amber Ridge, his mind scanned possibilities. He wasn't given to panic, but concern hummed beneath his surface. He thought of Monera, how she'd inherited not just her mother's incisive mind, but also a subtle steeliness. He thought of Lucille's warnings, the old adages that echoed in his mind like whispered prayers. And he thought of Cameron, who'd grown up balancing the privilege of his name with the responsibility of representing something far larger than herself. Shaq's presence in the community wasn't a billboard or a charity gala appearance. His contributions were quieter but substantial. Scholarships for underrepresented students, investments in local businesses run by Black and minority entrepreneurs, funding for reform initiatives aimed at addressing systemic biases in law enforcement and the justice system. He didn't do it for the headlines. He did it because he knew firsthand the weight of silence, the price of complicity, and now the silence on the other end of Cameron's phone was heavier than any he'd known. Landry in his patrol car wasn't merely delaying his decision on how to handle the situation. He was calculating the risk. Cameron's confidence had unnerved him. Her calm refusal to fold, her measured words. These weren't reactions he expected from someone he presumed to be easy prey. He flipped through his mental files, trying to place her. The recognition hadn't struck yet, but he felt it inching closer. Something about her rang familiar. Something about her composure hinted at an unseen strength. But even then, his ego whispered louder than his instincts. He believed he could control the narrative, shape it to his favor, as he always had. Meanwhile, Mimiara, unaware of the unfolding tension, was at home, practicing her forms in the privacy of the family's side studio. Each move was precise, her breath steady, her mind clearing as muscle memory took over. The practice wasn't about violence. It was about control, about knowing that no one could take her balance, her resolve, if only she knew how soon that control would be tested in a different arena. Shawnee, back at the estate, sat with Lucille on the back patio, sipping iced tea as they discussed community programs and the upcoming fundraiser. But when Shaq's call finally came through, the tone of his voice sliced through their tranquility. Without a word, Shawnee exchanged a glance with Lucille, a silent agreement passing between them. Trouble had found its way to their doorstep, but this wasn't a family that buckled under pressure. They'd built their lives on quiet strength, on knowing when to push back and when to stand tall. As Shaq's car turned off the highway onto Amber Ridge's main thoroughfare, the rising tension wasn't just in the measured thrum of his engine. It was in the layers of history and injustice that whispered through the streets. The perfect lawns, the glittering homes, the polished badges, they all masked a deeper truth. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about what happened when someone believed power gave them the right to bend reality. And what happened when the person they tried to bend was sharper, stronger, and more prepared than they ever expected. Landry's patrol car idled in the afternoon sun, the air thick with unspoken threats. He didn't know yet, but the quiet resistance he'd provoked wasn't merely one woman's defiance. It was the weight of generations behind her, a silent storm gathering strength. And as Shaq's car turned onto Hollow Drive, the first quiet winds of that storm began to stir. Landry leaned against the doorframe of his patrol car, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting Mira O'Neill's composed figure in the driver's seat. He didn't say much at first, just let the weight of his presence hang there like a crooked picture in a too-perfect room. His hand toyed with the edge of his citation pad, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh, the sound echoing faintly in the unnervingly quiet stretch of road. Mira's posture remained calm, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, but her eyes tracked every twitch of Landry's jaw, every shift in his stance. He hadn't asked for her license again. Instead, he was waiting for her reaction, for her to fill the silence he had orchestrated like a maestro of discomfort. And when she didn't flinch, when her gaze remained level, he finally spoke, his voice a low drawl dripping with forced civility. "Look, I get it," Landry said, drawing out the words like a man savoring a slow sip of poison. "You've got places to be, and I've got paperwork piling up. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You scratch my back, I forget this little issue. Simple." The implication was clear as the humid air pressing against her skin. His smirk widened slightly, revealing a flash of teeth that were too perfect to match the venom in his tone. His fingers ghosted over the citation pad, ready to jot down a violation he hadn't yet named. Mira inhaled through her nose, quiet and steady. Her muscles tightened imperceptibly, a tension running through her like a taut wire ready to snap, but not yet. "Not paying you," she said, her voice level and even, though the undercurrent of steel in it made Landry's smile tighten into a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, leaning in just a fraction closer, his shadow stretching into her car like an unwelcome touch. "I'm not asking. I'm offering you a choice. Pay a little now, or I dig up something that'll make your day a whole lot longer. Could be drugs in the glove box. Maybe a concerned citizen saw you driving erratically. You know how these things go." Her knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, but she kept her expression unreadable. Her mind flickered through the silent drills she'd run for years, the mental rehearsals of staying calm, keeping her voice steady, not letting the provocation pull her into a trap. Her father's words, her mother's warnings, Lucille's quiet strength, they weren't abstract advice anymore. They were anchors. Across town, in his car that hummed along the road like a restrained beast, Shaq's pulse quickened. His call to Marcus Drew, an old friend who still had ties within the local precinct, had been brief but loaded. Marcus had promised to look into it. His voice, thick with tense. Shaq's mind, however, was far from reassured. Memories from decades ago clawed at the edges of his focus. Nights when his own name hadn't been enough to stop a stop. Days when silence was the only armor against humiliation. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was a time for fury, and there was a time for precision. Right now, he needed clarity. Back at the checkpoint, Landry's patience frayed as Mara refused to rise to his bait. He flicked his citation pad shut with a sharp snap and leaned closer, his voice lowering to a tone meant for intimidation. "Do you know who I am, girl?" he asked, his words a hiss in the confined space between them. "Do you really think anyone's going to believe you over me? One call, and you're the one in cuss." Miara's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "I know exactly who you are," she said, "and I know the game you're playing, but I'm not scared of you." For a heartbeat, Landry froze. The name O'Neill finally clicked in his mind, realization flickering behind his eyes like a sputtering bulb. His smirk twisted into something uglier. "O'Neill," he repeated slowly, drawing out the syllables as if savoring them. "Big Shaq's little girl. Well, isn't that something? Guess I'll have to teach you that daddy's name can't buy you out of everything." The words felt like sandpaper against her skin, but Mamera refused to let them stick. Her mind raced, considering options. Landry wasn't bluffing. His type rarely did, but she knew his threats only held as much power as she allowed. Still, her options were narrowing. A public confrontation would escalate. Silence, on the other hand, risked complicity. Landry straightened, his hand resting casually on his belt, fingers brushing the handle of his citation pad again. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, the false charm melting away to reveal the cold authority beneath. "You're going to do exactly as I say. You're going to make a little contribution to my retirement fund, and you're going to smile while you do it, or I'm going to make sure you regret ever pulling onto this road." A shadow passed over the sun, darkening the interior of the car. Maura's breath remained steady, but her mind sharpened. She knew his threats were real. But so was her resolve. She wasn't just a young woman in a car. She was her father's daughter, her grandmother's legacy, and her mother's steel. She'd been underestimated before. This time she was ready. Meanwhile, Shaq's car rounded the final bend onto Hollow Drive, his GPS pulsing a quiet reassurance that he was close. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Landry's badge number confirmed. "Known for pulling stunts like this. Proceed carefully." Shaq's jaw tightened. He knew proceed carefully was code for Landry is dangerous, but untouchable until someone stands up to him. And in that moment, the old wounds he'd buried beneath years of public persona and private heartbreak split open. This wasn't just about Mayra. It was about every whispered warning, every closed door, every time someone had tried to make him smaller. Landry, still basking in his imagined control, didn't notice the shift in Mayra's eyes, the flicker of calculation, the steadying breath that signaled the start of her next move. She met his gaze, unflinching. "You can write whatever story you want," she said softly, her voice cutting through the thickening air like a blade. "But it won't end the way you think." Landry's smirk faltered, just a hair. For the first time, he sensed, not consciously, but instinctively, that the woman in front of him wasn't as cornered as he thought. But his ego, sharpened by years of unchecked authority, overrode the warning. "Suit yourself," he said, stepping back toward his patrol car. "Just don't say I didn't give you a choice." As he turned, Mayra's fingers tapped twice on her wristwatch, activating the silent distress signal linked to her father's private network. Across the block, Shaq's phone vibrated with the code he'd hoped never to see. The chessboard was set, the pieces were moving, and as the clouds thickened overhead, a storm far more potent than the weather was about to break. Landry thought he had her boxed in, his smirks tightening like nooses with every taunt, his words dripping disdain as he played the part of a man used to complete control. But Mayra O'Neil wasn't just any young woman caught at a roadside checkpoint. Beneath her poised exterior, her mind was a lattice of calculated calm, her every movement deliberate, her every breath measured. She wasn't just a black belt in martial arts, a fighter trained to channel energy and assess opponents. She was also adept at reading human behavior, at sensing the shifts in a predator's posture, the flickers of doubt behind a mask of arrogance. As Landry's voice pressed against her calm like a battering ram against steel, she let her expression soften, appearing slightly unsure, her eyes dropping just enough to make him believe he was winning. But inside, her focus sharpened, her pulse steady, the concealed smartwatch on her wrist, a gift from her father designed for moments exactly like this, silently recorded every word, every sneer. Landry's threats, spoken in tones he thought wouldn't carry weight, were threading themselves into a digital noose, and he didn't even know it. Outside, Shaq's car idled a block away, his hands gripping the wheel, as Marcus Drew's message replayed in his mind. Landry's name wasn't just another badge in a long line of law enforcement. It was a pattern, a predator who thrived on the vulnerability of black drivers, who had built his confidence on silence and shadows. But Shaq knew that silence only worked when no one dared to speak, when no one could document the truth. And his daughter wasn't just any driver, she was his daughter, the one who had spent years training not just her body, but her mind, the one who knew that real power wasn't loud, it was precise. Landry circled her car like a vulture sizing up its prey, his fingers drummed against the roof, his posture slouched but calculated, projecting indifference while his words turned sharper, baiting. "Thought you'd be smarter than this, O'Neil," he murmured, leaning in just enough for his voice to curl inside the car like smoke. "Daddy's name might open doors for you, but out here, it won't buy you out of a good old-fashioned lesson." Mayra's lips curled in the faintest of smiles, one so subtle it almost passed unnoticed. "You think power comes from making others afraid," she said softly, her tone barely above a whisper. "But fear is a brittle foundation. It cracks when pressure's applied from the right angle." Landry's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" She met his gaze, her expression calm, composed, like a chess master preparing for the final move. "I said," she repeated, her voice steady as stone, "that power built on fear is fragile, and it only lasts until someone stands up." For a moment, Landry's facade wavered. The confidence in his stance, the dismissive roll of his shoulders, all slipped into something less certain. But his pride, honed from years of unchecked authority, snapped back into place like a whip. He jabbed a finger in her direction, his voice low and sharp. "Don't push me, girl. You're not in control here." But Mayra's quiet resistance was already tilting the board. Every word he uttered, every threat he layered under his taunts, was being quietly archived. She wasn't escalating the situation, wasn't giving him the outburst he wanted to justify his next move. Instead, she was tightening the trap, one calm breath at a time. Meanwhile, in a quiet office tucked behind a nondescript storefront, Shaq's old contact Marcus was working his own angles. Files spread across a worn oak table, digital copies of complaints that had gone nowhere, Statements from drivers too scared to go public, whispers of settlements that had hushed the noise. Landry's name was a pattern, a stain spreading across the pages, a legacy of threats and coercion. But now, with Mara's situation unfolding in real time, Marcus had what he needed: context, corroboration, and thanks to Mara's concealed recording, undeniable evidence. Back at the checkpoint, Landry's agitation deepened. Nero's refusal to cower, to play into the fear he wielded so effectively with others, gnawed at him. His voice grew sharper, his threats more pointed, but her steady composure chipped away at his dominance. She wasn't fighting back with fists or outrage. She was fighting back with something far more dangerous: quiet, unwavering certainty. "Do you think you're special?" he hissed, leaning closer, his breath warm and acrid against her cheek. "Do you think your fancy watch and your father's name are going to save you?" Mira's response was soft, almost a murmur. "I don't need to be saved," she said. "I just need the truth to be heard." Landry's eyes flickered, the unspoken realization dawning. His smirk turned brittle, his posture stiffening. He took a half step back, glancing toward the road, scanning for witnesses. But in that moment, his facade cracked, not completely, but enough for Mara to see the fear pulsing beneath his bravado. A low rumble approached, the sound of an engine drawing nearer. Shaq's SUV emerged from the curve in the road, its dark silhouette a silent sentinel against the thickening afternoon haze. Landry's jaw tightened, a pulse jumping in his temple, as he recognized the figure behind the wheel. But Mara wasn't done. Her voice, quiet but clear, threaded through the charged air. "This isn't just about me," she said, her eyes locking onto Landry's. "This is about every time you thought you could get away with it. Every name you thought would stay silent. But I'm not silent. Not now. Not ever." Landry's face paled, his hands twitching against his belt. The swagger drained from his stance, replaced by something harder to mask: a flicker of panic. But his pride, his need to maintain the illusion of control, kept him from retreating outright. Instead, he straightened, his voice a brittle echo. "You think you've won something here," he spat. Miara's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Not yet," she said quietly. "But it's coming." Shaq's SUV rolled to a stop just behind her car. His door opened, his towering frame stepping out with deliberate calm. His eyes, dark and steady, locked onto Landry's trembling facade. No words passed between them. Not yet. But the shift in power was unmistakable. Landry's breath hitched, the realization settling into his bones. This wasn't just a girl with a fancy name and a cool head. This was a woman who had turned his own tactics against him, a father who wasn't content to let injustice fester, and a legacy that would not be silenced. As the clouds broke overhead, the sun cutting sharp through the haze, the balance of power tipped. Nemera's quiet resistance had not just cracked Landry's control, it had shattered it. And as the afternoon light flooded the road, the story of intimidation turned, quietly but irrevocably, into a story of defiance and undeniable truth. Shaq's SUV cut through the city's winding streets, his mind racing faster than the traffic lights blinking red and green in mechanical indifference. Each pulse of the tires over uneven asphalt wasn't just a step closer to Mera. It was a step deeper into the shadows that had long lurked beneath the city's polished surface. As he navigated familiar routes with an unfamiliar urgency, his phone buzzed with another message. This one from Harper Vance, a trusted legal mind, who had quietly fed him details on systemic abuses for years. The message was short, almost apologetic. "Shaq, it's bigger than we thought. Landry's protected, not just by the badge." That was the crack that widened into a fissure, a hint that the corruption wasn't just a one-man operation. It was a web, a network of power and silence, that had wrapped itself around the city's institutions, like ivy choking the life from old brick. Shaq's hands tightened on the wheel, his thoughts darting back to the quiet but pointed warnings his mother, Lucille, had given him about trusting the wrong men with the right handshake. This wasn't just about Miara's immediate safety, it was about unearthing a system that had been meticulously designed to keep people like her, like him, in check. He pulled into a discreet side lot behind the council building, where Donovan Huxley, a man whose charm was as sharp as his tailored suits, waited by the service entrance. Donovan had once been an ally, years ago when Shaq's business was still finding its footing. But time had turned Donovan into something colder, harder, a man who had learned how to survive by keeping one hand open in greeting, and the other ready to pull strings. As Shaq stepped out of his car, the air between them, crackled with an unspoken history. Shaq, Donovan greeted, his tone smooth but his eyes wary. Didn't expect you to come knocking today. Shaq kept his voice steady, his gaze level. Didn't expect to have to. I need to know how deep this runs, Donovan. Donovan sighed, casting a glance around the empty lot. His hands always in motion, toyed with the cuff of his sleeve. You're stepping into waters that don't want ripples, old friend. Landry's not working alone. He's part of a system, a network that's kept him insulated. You take him down, you risk exposing people with deeper pockets and longer memories than you'd like. Shaq's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his skin. That doesn't scare me. What does is letting this continue. Donovan's laugh was dry, without humor. You always did like playing the hero. But here's the part you don't know. Landry's little vendetta against Mamara? It's not random. It goes back years. To a deal your refusal to sign derailed. Remember that real estate contract, the one you turned down because it reeked of backdoor politics? Landry's brother was one of the investors. They lost millions. And Landry, he's been simmering ever since. The revelation hit Shaq like a blow. Not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed what he had suspected all along. This wasn't just prejudice and arrogance. It was calculated revenge, dressed up in a uniform and a badge. His refusal to compromise his principles, his insistence on playing by the book, had created ripples that turned into waves of resentment. Mara was caught in the undertow not just of systemic racism, but of personal vendettas masked as routine stops. Meanwhile, at the checkpoint, Miura's breathing remained even, her pulse a steady beat against the rising tension. Landry's voice had grown sharper, his taunts slicing through the air with practiced cruelty. He leaned into her window, his breath heavy with menace. Your daddy's not here now, girl. And out here, his money, his fame, it doesn't mean squat. But Miara's eyes met his without flinching, her calm unwavering, her mental discipline, honed through years of martial arts and crisis training, turned each insult into a stone she let fall rather than carry. Landry's escalating threats only revealed his own desperation. He was used to fear, to flinching responses and hushed acquiescence. But Miara offered none of that. Instead, she let him talk, every word being captured by her watch, her quiet defiance a mirror to his unraveling control. In the council building's shadow, Donovan's voice dropped, low enough to almost be lost in the breeze. You should back off, Shaq. Walk away while you can. You push this, and you're not just risking your reputation, you're risking hers. Shaq's voice, when it came, was low but firm. If I walk away now, I'm risking a lot more than a reputation. I'm risking letting men like Landry win. Donovan's lips tightened into a thin line, his polished facade cracking just enough to reveal the flicker of doubt beneath. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. Because this isn't just a fight for one girl. It's a fight for everything you believe in, and not everyone's going to stand with you. As Donovan turned away, Shaq's mind raced, piecing together the threads. Landry's personal vendetta, the protective web of complicit officials, the media figures who had turned a blind eye in exchange for favors. This wasn't an isolated checkpoint on a suburban street. It was a battleground, and the enemy wasn't just Landry. It was the silence that had allowed him to thrive. Shaq's phone buzzed again. A message from Harper. I've traced payments from shell companies connected to Landry's family. Looks like hush money to some victims. We're getting close. His chest tightened with a mix of dread and determination. The walls were closing in, but so was the truth. Back at the checkpoint, Mara felt the shift. Landry's aggression, once calculated, was teetering on the edge of recklessness. She could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the realization that she wasn't reacting as he had expected. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was strength, coiled and ready, and just as Landry leaned closer, his hand twitching with the instinct to assert control, the low rumble of Shaq's SUV approaching cut through the charged air. Landry's head snapped toward the sound, his expression hardening into a mask of frustration. But even as he squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim the upper hand, Miura's quiet smile hinted at the shift he hadn't seen coming. She wasn't alone. The web he thought had trapped her was unraveling, thread by thread, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Shaq stepped from the vehicle, his presence filling the space with an authority that needed no introduction. His eyes locked onto Landry's, not with anger, but with the calm precision of a man who knew the power of truth and patience. The confrontation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The web of complicity was breaking, and with it, Landry's grip on control. The balance had shifted. The silence was ending, and the real fight was just beginning. Mira O'Neill, still poised in her driver's seat, felt the tension tightening like a rope around her. She subtly tilted her smartwatch to activate its emergency beacon, a silent signal pulsing into the ether, its quiet vibration against her wrist, the only outward sign of action. She glanced toward a jogger crossing the street, her eyes catching his briefly before darting away, a subtle cue that was neither desperate nor panicked but deliberate and composed. The jogger hesitated, then casually pulled out his phone, dialing as he moved further from the scene to avoid drawing attention. Landry's posture stiffened as his confidence began to unravel. He circled the vehicle again, his movements growing sharper, the mocking smirk slipping into something harder and more brittle. His words became clipped, his threats tinged with unease, as he glanced over his shoulder at the jogger who was now too far to hear, but close enough to witness. The realization that he was being observed gnawed at him, but pride forced his voice into false bravado. "You think this little show of yours is going to scare me? You don't know what you're up against." Miara kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, her voice low and unwavering. "I think I know exactly what I'm up against, Officer Landry. The difference is, this time, you're the one being watched." Landry's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as paranoia seeped into his composure. He cast a quick glance toward the street, his mind scrambling to calculate how much of his tirade had been overheard or worse, recorded. His confidence, built on years of intimidation and silence, was cracking at the edges. He turned back to Miura, leaning in as if to reassert dominance, but his voice wavered under the weight of his own unraveling control. Shaq's SUV eased into view, its approach as silent and inevitable as the shift in the atmosphere around them. He stepped out, his stature commanding but his expression measured, a calm storm of purpose and unflinching resolve. His gaze swept over Landry with the slow precision of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to assert authority. The tension that had been stretching like a tightrope trembled at his presence, the balance of power shifting without a word. Landry straightened instinctively, his arrogance faltering beneath Shaq's silent scrutiny. "Stay back," he barked. But the command rang hollow, its force diluted by the tremor threading through his voice. Shaq didn't respond immediately. He moved closer with deliberate calm, his hands open at his sides, his voice low but resonant. "You've already crossed a line, officer," he said, each word carrying the weight of quiet condemnation. "You've let your power twist into something ugly. You've used fear as a weapon. But here's the truth: fear only works until the silence breaks." The words, though softly spoken, struck Landry harder than any physical confrontation could. His eyes flicked between Shaq and Mamara, his breath shallow as he struggled to maintain the pretense of control. He stepped back, his posture defensive, but there was nowhere to retreat. The quiet was no longer his ally. It was the weight of witnesses gathering, the whispers of onlookers becoming murmurs of recognition. At the edge of the block, Harper Greer's SUV skidded to a halt, dust curling around her tires as she leapt out, camera already in hand, her face framed by determined lines and sharp eyes, locked onto the scene like a predator sighting prey. She raised her camera, recording as she approached, her presence adding an undeniable layer of public exposure that Landry hadn't anticipated. His head snapped toward her, panic flaring in his eyes as he realized the confrontation was no longer contained to a quiet street. It was spilling into the world, documented, undeniable. Harper's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Officer Landry, care to explain what's happening here?" she called out, her tone sharp but laced with professional composure. Landry's mouth opened, then closed again, his words caught between denial and justification. He took a half step back, his hand twitching at his hip, but there was no plausible story, no easy excuse that could undo the evidence already stacking against him. Harper moved closer, her camera unwavering, capturing every detail, the fear flashing in his eyes, the subtle tremble of his hands, the unspoken realization that his world was crumbling. Shaq's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "This isn't just about today," he said, his words aimed not just at Landry but at the gathering crowd and the digital audience Harper's footage would reach. "This is about every unchecked abuse, every name silenced by fear, every time someone thought their power was untouchable. It ends here." Mira, still in her seat, added softly but clearly, "You thought you were playing a game, but you never realized I was recording from the start. And now the truth has a voice." Landry's face flushed a deep red, his breathing shallow as the weight of his actions pressed in from every angle. The jogger, now returning with quiet determination, spoke briefly into his phone before ending the call. "Police backup," Not Landry's allies but impartial reinforcements, was en. The street, once a silent stage for a private drama, was now a public reckoning. As the sounds of approaching sirens echoed faintly in the distance, Landry's bravado dissolved entirely. He turned toward Shaq, his expression a tangled mess of frustration and fear. "You think this is over? You think one recording, one story is going to change anything?" Shaq's reply was quiet but unshakable. "No. But it's a start." Harper's camera captured the final exchange, her lens pulling in tight on Landry's face. As the realization fully settled in, he was no longer the hunter. He was the exposed, the unraveling thread in a fabric of complicity that was finally being torn apart. As the sirens drew closer, Shaq's eyes met Memora's through the car window, a silent exchange of pride and relief. Harper's camera followed, her footage immortalizing the moment when silence was broken, when fear lost its grip, and when justice, long delayed, began its quiet ascent into the light. The showdown wasn't marked by violence, but by truth, and it was undeniable. Harper's footage went live within the hour, her social media post sparking a digital wildfire that no one could contain. Mira O'Neill's smartwatch recording followed, its clarity undeniable, Landry's voice slathered in bias, his taunts sharpened by entitlement, his threats echoing like a fist banging on a closed door. The sound of silence breaking, once a tremor, now roared through news feeds and comment sections. It wasn't just Landry's downfall playing out in real time. It was the collective exhale of those who had endured unseen and unheard for too long. Media outlets scrambled, each headline more incredulous than the last. Rogue officer exposed in racial extortion scandal. Big Shaq's daughter outsmarts corrupt cop. And caught on camera power, prejudice and a reckoning in suburbia. The narrative wasn't crafted by spin doctors or prepped in slick boardrooms. It was raw, real, and owned by Mara and Shaq, unfiltered and unshakable. The public's outrage wasn't fleeting. It was a tidal wave cresting into something more enduring. Protest formed outside precinct doors. Community leaders demanded accountability not just for Landry, but for every hand that had protected him. Shaq, calm amidst the frenzy, chose his words with care when he finally addressed the cameras. He stood not as a millionaire, not as an athlete, but as a father, a man unwilling to let silence swallow the truth. His voice was steady, each syllable deliberate, cutting through the noise without flourish. "This isn't about one officer, or one incident," he said. "This is about a system where silence protects power, where fear is currency. We're not here for revenge, we're here for change." His words didn't plead for sympathy, they ignited a collective call for justice. Public forums filled with voices, long hushed by intimidation. Former victims of similar extortion stepped forward, some emboldened by Mara's quiet defiance, others by the visible cracks forming in the institution's facade. The weight of their stories, layered over years of dismissal, created a tapestry of testimony too intricate to ignore. Mira, ever poised, didn't step into the spotlight for accolades. Instead, she stood at her father's side, her presence a silent testament to resilience. When a reporter pressed her about her martial arts training, expecting tales of confrontation and retaliation, she simply said, "Discipline teaches you to control yourself, not others. It's not about fighting back, it's about knowing when not." Her words, simple yet profound, reframed the narrative. It wasn't her physical strength that had disarmed Landry. It was her integrity, her calm precision in the face of intimidation. Landry's own attempts to reclaim control fell apart with each passing hour. His initial denials were drowned beneath the weight of audio evidence and witness testimony. His hastily arranged interviews, filled with half-truths and flailing justifications, only fueled the firestorm. When confronted with the footage, his smirk crumbled into confusion, his arrogance melting into hollow defensiveness. His past cases were reopened, revealing a pattern of racial profiling and abuse of power carefully concealed beneath layers of paperwork and silence. The walls of protection that once shielded him folded like paper under scrutiny. Yet the reckoning wasn't only his to bear. The system that enabled him, the superiors who turned a blind eye, the colleagues who laughed at whispered warnings, the policymakers who funded programs without oversight, stood exposed. The city's police commission convened emergency meetings, forced to address not just Landry's actions, but the broader failures that allowed him to operate unchecked. Community activists demanded reforms, not just promises. Legal advocates drafted petitions and proposals, turning outrage into actionable change. Shaq, recognizing the moment's weight, used his platform to amplify these demands. He appeared on national broadcasts, not as a celebrity but as a father and a community advocate. This is about creating a system where integrity is rewarded, not punished, he said, his tone as unwavering as his stance. It's about ensuring that no one, no daughter, no son has to face the kind of threats Minara faced. It's about building a community where power serves justice, not fear. His words resonated beyond the moment, sparking dialogues in households, schools, and city halls across the country. Mara's quiet courage became a touchstone for a generation seeking change. Her story taught in classrooms as an example of integrity over intimidation. Her decision to remain calm, to use her skills not for physical retaliation but for strategic de-escalation, redefined the narrative of strength. As Landry's suspension turned into termination, and his case into criminal charges, the city's leadership scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Apologies flowed from officials once silent. Promises of reform echoed through council chambers. But the public, guided by Shaq's steady voice and Miara's composed presence, demanded more than platitudes. They demanded accountability, oversight, and a seat at the table where decisions were made. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was palpable. Oversight committees formed, community liaisons appointed, and whistleblower protections strengthened. Shaq and Miara, though at the center of the storm, chose not to lead the new movement. Instead, they empowered those who had long fought in the shadows, activists, educators, and legal advocates, to step forward. They understood that real change wasn't about heroism, but about collective action. In the midst of it all, Miara's training studio saw an influx of students. Young people inspired not by stories of violent rebellion, but by the quiet strength of resilience and strategic thinking. Her classes, once intimate, expanded into workshops and seminars, teaching not just martial arts, but conflict resolution, self-discipline, and community building. The final image, captured not by Harper's lens but by countless phones, was of Miara and Shaq walking side by side through a community celebration, weeks later. No podiums, no speeches, just a shared, quiet moment, amid a gathering of families, advocates, and students. Their steps were deliberate, their presence unassuming, but the message was clear. Integrity had triumphed not through force, but through unwavering truth. The reckoning wasn't just about exposing a corrupt officer. It was about dismantling a culture of silence, about replacing fear with justice, and about showing that true power lies not in intimidation, but in the courage to speak, to stand, and to rebuild. And as the city exhaled, a new chapter quietly began, built on the unshakable foundations of discipline, integrity, and hope. The charges against Landry and his enablers were not merely punitive. They were a declaration that the system, long resistant to reflection, was beginning to yield under the weight of collective insistence. It wasn't Miara's training in martial arts that defined her legacy now, but her choice to embody restraint, clarity, and unshakable integrity when the world demanded retaliation. Shaq's voice, steady and grounded, framed the narrative not around their personal victory, but around the broader awakening that had rippled through their community. He spoke of the need for structures that protected the vulnerable, for policies that left no space for silent abuses to fester. His words were deliberate, not seeking applause but building a foundation. A message that justice wasn't about tearing down, but about rebuilding stronger, fairer, and more inclusive. The city listened, not with the distracted nods of compliance but with a focused urgency that recognized the cost of ignoring voices like Miara's. At a public forum weeks after the charges, community members gathered, not out of obligation, but driven by a shared understanding that change was not a spectacle, but a process. New accountability measures were drafted, policies that didn't just react to scandal, but anticipated prevention. Oversight committees, previously toothless, were restructured with genuine power to intervene. Community advocates, once sidelined, now sat at tables where decisions were made. Miara, at these meetings, wasn't a passive observer, but an active participant, her insights sharp, her perspective grounded in lived experience. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were weighted with a quiet authority that made even seasoned policymakers pause and listen. Lucille's wisdom, echoing through Miara and Shaq's choices, underscored each decision. Justice isn't just about catching the wrongdoers, Lucille had said once, her voice low with conviction. It's about making sure good people don't have to keep fighting just to live with dignity. This philosophy anchored every reform, every initiative that emerged from the turmoil. It wasn't enough to punish Landry and his circle. The goal was to create a system where someone like him couldn't thrive in silence again. Mira's story became a blueprint for resilience. Her black belt was no longer just a symbol of physical discipline, but a metaphor for the mental and emotional strength required to navigate spaces marred by prejudice and abuse of power. Schools invited her to speak, not about martial arts, but about courage, the kind that doesn't shout or strike but stands firm against injustice. Her sessions weren't lectures but dialogues, her approach emphasizing listening as much as speaking. Students, young and old, found in her a reflection of their own struggles, their own quiet battles for dignity. Shaq's role evolved from public figure to mentor. He used his platform to amplify initiatives that focused on community empowerment, scholarships for underrepresented youth, funding for local mentorship programs, and grants for grassroots organizations dedicated to systemic reform. His voice wasn't loud but persistent, a reminder that real change comes from consistent, determined effort, not flash-in-the-pan headlines. He avoided grandstanding, instead spotlighting the work of others, the whistleblowers, the activists, the quiet warriors who had long labored in the shadows. The city's transformation wasn't immediate, but it was tangible. Policies that once protected those in power now included provisions for real accountability. Training programs emphasized de-escalation and bias recognition, not as optional modules, but as core components. Landry's former precinct, once notorious for its unchecked abuses, saw a shift in culture, new leadership, community oversight, and a focus on transparency. His enablers, once complicit through silence or indifference, were held to account, their careers forever marked by their failures. In the midst of this, Mimera and Shaq remained rooted in their purpose. They declined offers to turn the story into a media spectacle, choosing instead to focus on building sustainable change. Mimera's training center, once a modest space for martial arts, expanded into a hub for community engagement. Workshops on conflict resolution, bias recognition, and resilience were offered alongside traditional classes. Her approach wasn't about creating fighters, but about nurturing individuals capable of standing firm against injustice in whatever form it appeared. Lucille's presence, though quieter now, remained a constant source of guidance. Her words, often shared over quiet family dinners or walks through familiar streets, reminded them that true justice isn't performative. It's lived. "It's not enough to win a battle," she said once. "You've got to make sure the ground you stand on doesn't shift back under your feet." These words echoed in Shaq's mind as he collaborated with community leaders to establish a permanent council for oversight and reform, ensuring the changes they fought for weren't vulnerable to the next shift in public attention. As spring gave way to summer, the community gathered not for protest but for celebration. Mira and Shaq, standing quietly amidst a crowd of diverse faces, were not the center but part of the whole. The event wasn't marked by speeches or ceremonies, but by shared meals, music, and moments of connection. The new council unveiled a mural at the entrance of the community center, a tapestry of faces, stories, and symbols representing resilience, integrity, and the quiet strength that had redefined justice in their city. The final image of Mira, standing beneath the mural, wasn't one of victory but of continuity. She wasn't a warrior posing for cameras but a young woman who had chosen to turn personal injustice into a catalyst for systemic change. Her black belt, now more symbolic than literal, was a quiet testament to the fight that had been waged, not with fists but with unwavering truth and clarity. The community, no longer silent or complicit, stood with her, not as followers but as allies in a shared mission for equity. Shaq's quiet smile as he watched his daughter engage with community members wasn't one of triumph but of pride, the kind that recognizes the strength of resilience over retaliation. His role had been protector, advocate, and mentor. But now he stepped back, allowing the space for others to rise and carry the torch forward. In the end, justice wasn't about a single victory or a public reckoning. It was about creating spaces where courage didn't have to wear armor, where integrity wasn't a fight but a given. It was about ensuring that the next generation didn't have to wage the same battles just to be seen, heard, and respected. And as the city exhaled into a new era of accountability, Mira and Shaq stood as quiet reminders that real change isn't shouted, it's built, one decision at a time. Shaq's broad shoulders seemed relaxed but carried an invisible weight, the kind only a father who's seen his child navigate the treacherous waters of injustice can bear. His gaze swept the mural, its vivid colors depicting faces and stories of resilience, a patchwork of the community's strength. His mind drifted through the memories of recent months, the tension of uncertainty, the frustration of watching systems fail, and the quiet pride of seeing his daughter stand unflinching when everything around her seemed designed to push her down. Beside him, Mimara stood tall and composed, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her eyes tracing the mural with the same silent reverence. The black belt she wore wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a symbol, a declaration of the strength she had cultivated not for confrontation but for resilience. She exhaled softly, the sound barely audible against the whisper of the wind, and her voice when it came was low, but sure. "You always told me discipline wasn't just for the dojo, Dad," she said, her gaze fixed on the mural. "It was for life, for knowing when to speak, and when to stay silent, for standing firm even when you feel like falling." Shaq's lips curved into a faint smile, not one of triumph but of understanding. "And you listened," he murmured, his voice rumbling with quiet emotion. "You listened when it counted. You didn't let fear take the lead. You stayed steady, even when the world tried to rattle you." Mara's head turned slightly, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "I had your example, Mom's strength, Grandma Lucille's wisdom. I had Harper, and the people who believed in me. This isn't just my story. It's all of ours." Shaq nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers with a depth of pride that needed no words. He knew the truth of her statement. How the journey they'd navigated wasn't just about one family, one injustice, or one reckoning. It was a tapestry woven from countless threads. Voices once silenced, now amplified. Injustices once hidden, now laid bare. It was about the collective courage of a community determined to rewrite its own narrative. The gentle hum of distant traffic barely touched the edges of their shared silence. In the quiet, there was a sense of closure, but not finality. The community center, bathed in the soft glow of evening lights, stood as a testament to what could be achieved when courage met opportunity, when integrity refused to bow to intimidation. It wasn't just a building, it was a promise, a space where truth could be spoken, where resilience could be nurtured, and where the next generation could learn that silence is never the answer to injustice. Shaq's hand brushed lightly against Mara's shoulder, a gesture of both reassurance and respect. "You know," he said quietly, his tone reflective, "this place, this moment, it's not the end of something. It's just the start of what comes next. It's the ground we'll build on, not the hill we'll stand on." Mara's lips curved in a faint smile, her eyes shimmering with quiet determination. "It's a reminder," she said softly, "that every step we take matters. Every voice counts, even the quietest one." They stood there, the two of them, not as symbols but as people, flawed, determined, connected by love, and shared purpose. The mural's colors deepened in the fading light, its stories etched not just in paint, but in memory, in lived experience. It wasn't a monument to victory, but a living narrative, one that would continue to evolve as more voices joined the chorus. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faint scent of the flowers planted along the center's walkway. Shaq inhaled deeply, his thoughts settling into a quiet space of reflection. "You taught me something too, you know," he said, his voice low and steady. "You reminded me that strength isn't in what we can fight, it's in what we can build. It's in the patience to stand steady when everything tries to push us over, and it's in the humility to know we can't do it alone." Mara's head tilted, her expression softening. "We'll keep building," she said simply, "one step at a time." Their shared gaze lingered on the mural for a long moment, the silence between them, rich with unspoken understanding. The world beyond the community center pulsed with its own rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution that had unfolded here. But for Shaq and Mayra, the world had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. They had faced a system designed to silence and discredit, and instead of crumbling they had chosen to build, to speak, to stand. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting the mural into a gentle twilight glow, Shaq's voice broke the quiet. "The question isn't what happens next," he said, his tone measured. "It's whether we'll have the courage to keep going when no one's watching. When the cameras are gone, when the headlines fade, will we still choose to stand?" Mimara's answer was quiet but certain, her gaze unwavering. "Yes," she said, "we'll stand." Their silhouettes, framed against the mural's glow, were a quiet testament to the journey they had traveled. The final challenge wasn't shouted or staged. It was a simple, profound question left hanging in the evening air. A call not just to them but to anyone willing to listen. Will you stand silent in the face of injustice? Or will you choose, like Mira and Shaq, to break the silence and build something better? And as the community center's lights bathed the pavement in a soft, steady glow, the answer, unspoken yet clear, echoed through the stillness. We'll build. Every voice counts, and silence is no longer an option. Share this story, spark the conversation, and let the truth resonate far beyond one street corner. Together we rewrite the rules and hold power accountable. Will you be part of the movement that stands?